Good afternoon. If you are just happen to be, stopping by the Facebook page of the nonprofit partnership, then you see that we are broadcasting this interview live this afternoon. And welcome everyone. We are really, really thrilled to have our special guest, Gaby Hernandez from ÓRALE. And before I hand it over to Gaby and introduce her, I just want to take a few minutes to thank our sponsor in the series that the nonprofit partnership has titled Our Stories, Our Time. Our sponsor is the Port of Long Beach, and we wish to thank them for their ongoing support of all of these interviews and these stories that we capture from local community leaders, from local organizations that are just having a tremendous impact in our community. So with that, I would love to welcome you, Gaby. This is like the second interview that you've done with TMP. So always very grateful for your time and your interest to engage with TMP. So welcome, Gaby.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's always good to be here with you. I'm excited to be in this Facebook Live. I haven't done one in a minute, so I'm excited to be back. My name is Gaby Hernandez. I use pronouns she, her, ella, and I serve as the Executive Director for ÓRALE, which stands for Organizing Rooted in Abolition, Liberation, and Empowerment, and formerly known as the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition.
And the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition has been for many years such also a really important organization in our city and throughout the years also regionally. We know that you all have also been involved in regional and statewide work, and we're going to get to know a little bit more about also this transformation from Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition to ÓRALE. But before we dive into that, Gaby, share with us a little bit more background about you, your history, your background, how you came into social justice work.
Yeah. So I was originally born in Mexico City, and I lived there until I was about 12 years old. And then my family, because of a death in the family, we had decided to migrate to the US, and my family had settled in Oceanside, which is a small city in San Diego County and North County side of the county. And so I got to see, as soon as I crossed the border, a difference, right? And a difference of how I was treated compared to my cousins that were citizens, right? And so I got to see a lot of injustices from a very early age when it came to systemic barriers, to came how we were treated in school, how my mom was treated at work. And so I think all of those things really put a flame in my heart to do this work that I do now. Even back then, I remember thinking, these things are not okay, and no one should be treated in this way, and especially because I saw the comparison of how other people were treated. And so I'm a strong believer that people shouldn't be treated differently because the lack of immigration status. And I can go as far and say that, the status is imposed by the government, right? We're not really undocumented. No human being is illegal or undocumented. It's simply a label that has been put on us. But I think having that context and understanding that all people should be treated fairly and with dignity and have freedom really motivated me to do this work. So I started in student organizing. That's, I think, where a lot of us start, right? When we get out of our homes and start thinking, oh, there's change that could happen. And the change that has happened in the past, it's only because people organized for it. And so that through that and through doing student organizing and through doing, making change in institutions and academic institutions through organizing made me realize that there's changes that could be made, right? Because oftentimes we think, oh, things are fixed. That's the way they are. They're never going to change, right? And even that's what we hear growing up, right? Like, just look the other way, keep going. And if it's not affecting you, you don't have to get involved, right? But whether we think about it or not, things are impacting us and affecting us all the time, right? So I think that really motivated me to do this work. And then from student organizing, I got involved in community organizing. And again, I fell in love with, having people understand and recognize their power and then organize to work and make just systems change work. Because I think all of us are capable of it. People do it all the time, especially when they recognize their power and they realize that they're not alone, right? Because one individual alone can't do it. But if you have a collective of people that come together to push for change, then it's likely to happen. And so I think all of those things motivated me to do this work, and seeing injustices at many levels in my life motivated me to embark on this journey and to focus on like providing the tools that people need to be empowered for them to do work, and organizing work to make change ultimately.
Wow. And, I appreciate what you said, that, a lot of this really does start with kind of that spark around awareness, whether it's a personal experience, something that, you grow up as a child, noticing the stark differences. And so I'm just kind of curious, though, going back to the point about organizing, did this start in high school? Did it start in college? What was that like? And it sounds like it was a very formative time for you.
Yeah, I often say that, like, you really start, if you're undocumented, you really start organizing from the moment you're aware of that, right? Because then you realize that things are different for you. And so I think it started early on. I would say even middle school, and then in high school, I was part of the massive walkouts that happened in 2006, 2004, 2006, around those years. And then it really got more heavy in community college, and then when I transferred to Cal State Long Beach. So it was a journey, and also I have to recognize that, being in that environment in Oceanside, and in a place where it's heavily militarized, so there's a big military station that is heavily policed, border patrol presence is extremely heavy. So given all that context, you could only organize with certain limitations in a way, right? Because you were at risk. And so when we did organizing, it was in the low, the down low. It wasn't like we were out because of those threats that we had that were very real for our safety. And so I think it really started getting very intense when I was involved in community college, and then the university. So I think it was like a stepping stone, to be able to get there. And I think as you grow, you also get tools, right? And then
Yes.
you become empowered yourself by understanding systems and
Yes, absolutely. And I think the reception on Gabby's line has slowed down just a little bit. But one of the things I just wanted to highlight as well about that is the fact that, as you're saying, Gabby.
I think we're back.
We are back, and I want to apologize for that. I know on my end, unfortunately, it seems like I was kicked right out
No worries,
out
but
of
we're
the
here.
internet. So I apologize for that, Gabby, and I apologize to everyone for that. But those are the, Zoom and internet vibes that weren't
Yes.
aligned in our favor today. But to jump right back into the conversation, though, one of the things I was reflecting on as Zoom so rudely kicked me off was the fact that, just to kind of go back to your point about, you're very, you really recognize that even through kind of these formative years as a young adult, you were really picking up on a lot of skills, I think a lot of ways to really speak to what is going on. And systems change work, as you well know, is not easy, and it's not the kind of work that has an immediate return on investment necessarily. It can take a long time, and it needs to be consistent, and you probably need to pivot at every turn and reconfigure your strategies. And so that does a lot to really build your deck or your toolkit of various skills, right, and approaches to the work.
Yep, definitely. I feel like it's the momentum that you build, the knowledge that you build, the connections that you make, right? Because I mentioned earlier, you don't do this work alone. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned, even, in my younger years in organizing in high school and community college. Like, you can't do this alone. You need to have a collective of people. And I think having that as a cornerstone and like as a core of like understanding that you alone can't make a huge change. You can definitely be part of the change, but you yourself can make the massive change, right? You need a collective of people. And so I think that was like also a big lesson that I learned, that is important for you to take with you, right? That way you understand that we all have our work to do. We all have a piece of it that we can all do. It's not one person alone that will be able to solve everything that comes their way, right? But rather like a collective, and everyone has their part.
Yeah, absolutely. And what an incredible approach and perspective to have, because I think that unless you're mired in this kind of work and you know that that's part of the way that you do the work is this collective approach, oftentimes in a lot of community organizations, folks just kind of go along and they work in their silos, and it happens. Life is busy, work gets busy, but what a great approach to also and perspective to develop as you're still, growing in the field and in the sector. So how did you connect to what was then Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition?
I started as a volunteer at that time, and I think it was 2016. It's always been a desert in Long Beach for legal resources for immigrant communities. And so that was the case back then too. In 2016, LBRC at that time was doing a lot of legal clinics. And so bringing those free of cost to the community to ensure that they had at least, a consultation with an attorney and see if they had any opportunities for to adjust their status, right? Or just understand where their cases were. And so I decided to volunteer for the organization and support with those efforts. And so that's how I got involved. So I was doing a lot of the organizing on campus at the university, but then I understood that I was going to leave the university eventually, and I wanted to be involved in community work outside of it. And so I started to look for organizations that were doing work with the immigrant community. And so there's not that many, honestly. There weren't that many then. I think there's a little bit more now, but there weren't that many then. And so LBRC was and is one of the only organizations supporting immigrant communities in Long Beach. And so that's how I started. I started as a volunteer and wanting to support the efforts to ensure that people had free legal consultations with immigration attorneys to learn about their cases. Because as you know, many people are scammed, right? Many people in our communities need a desperate answer to see if there is a way of relief for them to adjust their status. And so they may be willing to pay a notario or someone that just prepares documentation, or simply just a scammer that tells them, oh, we're going to give you this, they just lie to them. And then people end up pouring their hard-earned money into them, right? And so I think that was a big thing that LBRC recognized at that time. And so I really loved that was what they were doing, right? Understanding that our communities were falling being victims of fraud when it came to immigration. And so having them have a consultation with a reputable attorney that was trusted could mean that they don't lose their money, right? That they're not scammed, that they understand what their options are.
Right. Now, when you started to do work with LBIRC at the time, was the conversation, was the work around, for example, the DREAM Act, was that just launching? Was that taking place? What was really kind of cementing a lot of the focus of your activism when you first started to engage with the organization?
Yeah, so DACA was around at that time. So DACA was a program that was announced in 2012. And for those that don't know, it's DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. So that provides temporary protection status from deportation to people that were here before a certain date and for amount and certain criteria that people had to meet in order to qualify for it. And so I understood at that time that was a program that wasn't sufficient, that wasn't covering all of the immigrants that live in this country. And so I remember thinking, well, that's one good thing. And some people have an option to apply for that, but many people don't. And many people in my family, many people in my immediate family didn't have access to that. So it really got me thinking too, we have to do work beyond that, right? Because this is just protecting a certain amount of people, but it's not protecting all of our people that live in this country and that, build families here, and are part of our communities, right? That make the cities that we live in function. And so I think I recognized at that time that we needed to do more organizing beyond just temporary programs like this, right? That we needed to ensure that our communities were seen as people, that they were treated with dignity, that they had opportunities to thrive, right? And that they felt like they were empowered to connect with their elected officials, right? Whether they were undocumented or not, people have the ability to contact their elected officials and understand that they are accountable to them, right? Regardless of their status, immigration status in this country. So I think at that time I was grappling with all of that, understanding that there's this program that exists that I may be a recipient of, but what about the rest, right? What about the rest of my community? And so that really pushed me to to start digging more into like what organizing could happen to understand, to work towards having people be treated with dignity and for them to have opportunities to thrive, not just a certain amount of people, right?
Right. And, it's interesting because at the time, I recall a lot of the discourse in the country. It got to be at many moments very divisive. I think there were people who felt very, very strongly on opposite sides of the camp and all places in between about, DACA and what was going on. And I think one of the things I know that I learned from you when I interviewed you, I guess it's been about 2 years now, Gabby. It's been a while, and lots has happened. So we want to get to that in a minute. But one of the things I just wanted to highlight is that it was, I think, also during this time. I mean, you've obviously continued, your career in academia as a student, and I think that this was also a time where there was a nexus between the social justice work that you were doing, boots on the ground, engaging with this nonprofit organization. But at the same time, you had this perspective, like this academic perspective on what was going on. The data coming in, and just, I think you were a scholar who could also speak to just legislatively how things were changing. And this moment was a part of something much bigger. I remember that about our last interview.
Yeah, I think it's important to have those two things kind of in conjunction, because it helps you look at things differently, right? And as you mentioned, people were divided then, people are divided now, right? And so they put
Yes.
immigrant folks in two different categories, deserving and undeserving, right? It's simply potentially having an education degree means that you may be deserving, when in reality, I feel like all human beings should be deserving of having an opportunity, right? To have an opportunity to have access to resources to then thrive, right? And so I got to see that, right? I got to see that in a way, people painted young immigrants that were going to school in a perfect light, right? As the perfect model immigrants. And their parents were the opposite, right? Including my mom, right? Or folks that from that generation, it's their fault that they brought us here. When in reality, it's not my fault, it's not her fault, it's systemic, right? It's systemic and built in that way. So having those two go hand in hand really helped me see that these are all systemic things, right? All the hardships that I went through, all the struggles that I went through, it wasn't because, me not doing enough or my mom not doing enough, right? It was because it's systemically built in this way. And so having to bridge that gap of that division that existed between bad and good immigrants is also something that motivated me, right? To let people know, like, I may be that model immigrant that you talk about, but I do not, buy into that narrative that, my parents are, for whatever reason, not the best because they simply made a decision to survive, right? And so I think having all of that has been really helpful for me to see the intersections that our lives are not just connected to immigration, right? We're also prized by other systems that are at play and that work with one another.
Yeah. That description that you just gave right now is also, I think, a perfect way to capture where the organization has been over the last several years. Because after DACA, there's also been a lot of milestone moments that have marked policy changes, legislative changes in the field of immigrant policy or immigrant rights. And so it's impacted you clearly. You've also impacted the way that the organization has navigated through the changes lately, and your colleagues have also been impacted. And so what has led then to this point where there was looking at just sort of the organization, but there was there's been a lot of discourse, I think a lot of strategic discourse at LBIRC. You're now ÓRALE. So talk to us about kind of the context around the branding. Why did that happen?
Yes. So again, because I think we are connected to the community and people that are dealing with this on a daily basis, right? Dealing with lack of access to resources or spaces, or access to certain tables that they should be part of, right? Because we realize that and we recognize that they're the backbone of our organization, right? And that all of our work is influenced by community. it wasn't right to have a name that they couldn't even pronounce. So, you know,
Mm.
LBIRC in English, Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition in English, translating that, it was just too long of a word. It wasn't connecting to the people on the ground, to the people that we're working with. And so we decided to go on this journey. So we went on this journey to build a strategic plan, which a lot of nonprofits go through. And so in this plan, we realized we are community center. We are like our work is influenced by community. And so we need to revamp, right? And so we revamped our mission, our vision, and values to ensure that they were connected to, again, the work that we're doing. And so then the immediate next step was to do that with our name and our image, right? We wanted it to make sure that they had community input, that folks felt like they were part of the process, and then also it was something that they connected to. And so ÓRALE, it was almost a 2-year long process where we had to work with different outside folks and support to be able to get us to where we are. But we were able to work on it in a collective manner and to be able to get an image that we feel proud of, a name that we're proud of, a mission that we're proud of, and that's all connected to the community and the work that we're doing on the ground. So I think having more connection to the people that we work with, having them, and part of like living a dignified life is like being able to say the names of the organizations that you're part of, right?
Yeah.
Able to connect with that.
Mhm.
And so all that pushed us to be where we are now and to rebrand to ÓRALE, which honestly, it was back and forth through a lot of different names, but órale really felt like it's an action word in Spanish. And so it can mean so many things in Spanish. And so we decided to go with that because it felt true to us. And the acronym, it even felt more true to us. So it's the same in Spanish and English.
Mhm.
And I'll say it slower because I said it at the beginning, but I probably said it too fast. It stands for Organizing Rooted in Abolition, Liberation, and Empowerment. And so that feels true to our values. And so being able to have an acronym that, and then have a powerful name, like it just was the perfect match and the perfect recipe to what we have now. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited. This rebranding just happened as of April of this year, but it was
Mhm.
a lot of work that went into it, almost a 2-year, I would say like a year and a half and 2 years that we went into meeting with different people, different folks that, you know, who can help us bring this vision to life and to ensure that it includes different voices, right? And so, yeah, that's where we are now. And I'm, like I said, I'm very, very excited for this new name and the new chapter that ÓRALE is embarking on.
Absolutely. And, I think from an outsider, standing outside and looking at your process, the bits and pieces that we were able to glimpse into, also you should be proud of even the process of going through that, because you were, again, very intentional about the engagement. The community members that you serve, where were your stakeholders in the process as well? They informed a lot of this direction. And, I know that this, is not necessarily one of the questions that you and I had discussed a little earlier before the interview went live, but I'm curious to know from you if you think that this is something that's happening more and more frequently within the nonprofit sector, where there's very deep intentionality around community engagement. And it's not in the traditional sense of the word, but in the sense it's more transformative. And I think órale is an example of that, where the very individuals impacted by the services or the mission of your work are also the same ones that are informing the direction. And not in a one-sided conversation, but in this two-sided conversation. Do you see that happening more and more in the nonprofit sector, that there's a lot more intentionality around very authentic engagement?
Yes, and I hope that that's kind of the trend that people continue to be on, because it's important to have folks that have lived through whatever issue they're working through, whatever the nonprofit, whatever the organization may be working through. You have to ensure that you have people that have been through that as part of the organization, right? Because you can't come in and tell people, this is how I think you should live your life, or this is what I think you should have access to. People should be able to tell you what they need access to and what their needs are, right? And that's really important, because you have to have the community input, but also community is your staff, right? Community is the people that you're working with as well, like your colleagues. And for us,
Yes.
the people that that are part of the organization are all impacted by this. So no one has to tell them or explain or break things down to them of how things work, because they have lived it themselves. And who better than someone that has lived it themselves to say, I want to make a change, and this is how I think we should be able to go about it, and bringing community to also express what the needs may be, right? So I think there's nothing to compare to that. And I hope that that continues to happen. And I hope that the nonprofit sector continues to like elevate and support the leadership of those folks, so that we have
Yes.
more people at the table that have lived through things, and we don't have someone else coming and saying, hey, this is what you should do from an outside perspective, but rather the people that have lived through it come in and come with the solutions, right? Because I do believe that our community has the solutions. People have been able to navigate very difficult times because they have the wisdom and resiliency, right? And I just hope that our folks didn't have to be resilient all the time.
Absolutely. I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think that as we kind of then turn the corner on our conversation, and it saddens me that we only have like a few minutes left because I know there's a time constraint today. But as we turn the corner on this conversational piece, and you look at the future of ÓRALE and what is to come, that I also hope that as a part of that future, ÓRALE and you and the other organizational leaders are also, invited to more and more thought leadership spaces, because this journey that you've just given us a little taste of is important. It's important not just because you're a leader in our community, but you're also leading an organization that is modeling so much of where the discourse needs to be. So on that note, Gaby, tell us a little bit more about what the future has in store for ÓRALE.
Yeah, thank you for saying all of that, Carolina. I really appreciate that, getting that outside perspective. And I can tell you we're not perfect, but we're trying, we're trying because we're trying to break that model that hasn't worked for a lot of our communities. And so what I'll tell you that I think ÓRALE will continue to do is to continue to build power, immigrant power, to be able to make change, not only in Long Beach, but in the state of California and beyond. I think we'll continue to do the work of continue to like intersect the issues that impact immigrant communities. Oftentimes people think, oh, immigrant communities are only worried about citizenship. I can guarantee you that it's not true, right? We're worried about housing. We're worried about where our kids go to school, right? We're worried about what happens in our city, what happens in our county, what happens in our state, the benefits that we get, what happens with policing, right? What's the interaction between policing and ICE, and how does ICE go into our neighborhoods and kidnap our people, and then we have normalized that, right? So there's tons that we're connected to, and it's not just having an immigration status. We're impacted by so many things, because a lot of people that don't have their status, they may be folks that have no way to adjust their status and may have no way in the near future. So we need to make sure that people have the opportunities and the access to things that they need in order to have a better life, to be able to have the opportunity to thrive. I continue to say that, but it's really what we believe in, right? We want people to have the opportunity to thrive. And that won't happen unless we continue to make this movement of making a statement that, community folks that are immigrants that are not only faced by immigration, but rather a whole bunch of other things that all of us are connected to, right? You, me, whoever's watching, we're worried about how are we going to have food on our table, right? How are we going to pay the rent?
Safety, all of those things.
All of those things that also involves immigrant communities. That's why our work is not just one issue. It's like based on different things, because we understand that immigrant communities they're not living single issue lives, and I'm stealing that line from Audre Lorde, who says, people don't live single issue lives, because we don't, we're complex beings and that live intersectional lives.
Right. Not to be compartmentalized. So in the last, few seconds we have on the call, Gaby, how can anyone watching this interview connect with you? What is the best way to just follow what ÓRALE is doing? But also some folks may really want to connect with you directly. What are the best ways to do that?
Yes, feel free to send me an email. My email is super easy. It's Gaby, Gaby @orale.org. And you can follow all of our social media platforms. They're all under @OraleLB. And you'll be able to see all the calls to actions that we have, all the programming that we have on our social medias. And also, we're also welcoming donors all the time. So if you feel like this is
Yes.
something that you care about, feel free to visit our website and become a monthly donor and ensure that this work keeps going and that this work doesn't die, right? So I encourage everyone to follow us on social media, but also visit our webpage and donate if you have the means to continue, for us to continue to do this work. And thank you
Absolutely.
for having us.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. And unfortunately, we always run out of time. Because one of the things I was going to say, we didn't even scratch the surface. We didn't even talk about the fund that, your organization is led in the city of Long Beach. Okay, that we have to do a part
I'll
two.
say one more thing because
Yes.
it's out. So the RFP for the Long Beach Justice Fund that ÓRALE was a lead on and advocating for it is out now. So if you're a legal service provider that can provide representation for folks in deportation proceedings or in humanitarian visas or in the Ninth Circuit appeal, please apply for this opportunity. We actually have it as one of our posts in our social media platforms, so please visit that. But also it's on the Long Beach City's website as well.
Excellent.
Long Beach Justice Fund RFP. And so I encourage everyone that is interested in that and that has the abilities to do that to visit that and apply for that.
Absolutely. And please reach out to Gaby, GABY at órale, ORALE.org. Gaby, it's always a pleasure. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carolina.